Good morning, and welcome to the Salem Lutheran Church Sunday Morning Bible Study. We'll be getting started in just a few moments. If you'd like to join in on the discussion, please join us by going to slcw.org to join the group. We'll be starting in just a few moments.
Well, good morning. Good morning. I hope you can hear me, and I hope there's no echo. Anyways, today we are going to be discussing, at least for a while, Psalm 144. This is going to be at least a 2-weeker, so we're not going to be able to finish Psalm 144 all today. So let's jump into it and get started on this. Oh, by the way, how do you like my shirt? This is sort of my Hawaiian shirt, my island shirt that I wear when I go to Bermuda. So I hope you like it. Anyways, it's got all kinds of, I don't know what it's got on it. Palm branches or palm leaves. Not sure what to call them. Anyway.
Awesome.
Pardon, Barb?
I just said awesome.
Oh, well, thank you. You talking about the shirt or me?
Both.
All right, anyway, Psalm 144. Let's just jump right into it and see how far we can get. My commentator says that this psalm has a title, a Psalm of David. It is believed to have been written near the time David came to be recognized as the king over all the tribes of Israel, and the psalm expresses David's heart for the nation in both war and peace. In other words, we've looked at psalms over the last several weeks, which were kind of from that time period when David was in hiding from Saul and from his personal enemies. And this one is later on. This is at a time when Saul has been killed by the Philistines, and David has assumed the kingship of Israel. Now, you might think, well, that means Israel, this whole country was ruled now by David, right? Not quite. When David became the king of Israel, there were these 12 tribes. Think of Israel like the United States, filled with 50 different states. Israel was filled with 12 states, or we call them tribes, one for each of Jacob's sons. Then there were 12 tribes of Israel. They comprised Israel. Each of them had a tribal head, sort of like a governor in the state. And they were in some ways independent, in some ways ruled by the king. But even with saying that, Israel still wasn't a unified country. Because within the boundaries of the borders of Israel, there were several non-Israelite tribes that controlled vast pieces of land. There were the Canaanites, for instance, a tribe called the Jebusites. In fact, when David became king of Israel, Jerusalem was not his capital city because Jerusalem was controlled by a tribe called the Jebusites. And so early in David's kingship, he conquered Jerusalem, conquered the Jebusites, and subjected them to his rule. And that's when Jerusalem became the capital city. But at the time of this psalm, the Jebusites were there. The Canaanites were there. He still had to deal with the Philistines, who were on the southern part of what is now Israel. And by the way, many people have asked me, well, who are the Philistines? I don't know who they are. Well, most historians believe the Philistines were what we would today call the Phoenicians. Who are the Phoenicians? The Phoenicians were a seafaring people, and their capital was up in Tyre and Sidon, which is in modern Jordan. But they control vast parts of the Mediterranean. They were a very militaristic people, great sailors. They had great trade routes. In fact, the Philistines were the first people to develop the idea of money, because that was an easy way to keep records of trade. Instead of bartering, well, I'll give you 1 sheep for those 2 goats. Instead, you would use money. And so the Philistines developed a monetary system in order to be able to keep track of trades. So we think that's who the Philistines were, a very militaristic, seafaring people known for their trade. And they were constantly a threat during David's early days on his southern borders. You remember Saul was always fighting the Philistines. There's a very famous story of David killing Goliath, who was a giant among the Philistines. So the Philistines, the Jebusites, the Canaanites, there was all these battles still going on when David became the initial king. So this psalm, though, comes from that period of time, early in David's still fighting battles. He's still fighting wars against some of these other non-Israelite tribes that are there in his land and trying to fight them off. And that's what the psalm kind of talks about a little bit. And so the psalm begins. Oh, by the way, if you ever, I was almost going to show you, but I can't figure out a good way to show this. Let me see if I kept it. No, I didn't. But if you would ever Google the high priest vestments, the high priest wore what on his chest would look like kind of a metal plate, sort of rectangular in shape, and in there were 12 stones, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. It was in that same gold plate, by the way. At the bottom were two other stones called the Urim and the Thummim. And those were the yes and no stones. Every time the king had a question to ask God, he would go to the priest, and the question always had to be expressed in a yes or no question. And so he would say, should I go to war with the Philistines? And the priest would pull out these two stones, put them in a little sack, shake the sack around, reach in and pull one of the stones out. If he pulled the yes stone, that meant yes. If it pulled out the no stone, that meant no. You might think that's kind of a stupid way to make decisions, but the rationale behind it was that God, who is all powerful, would see to it that the priest picked the stone he wanted. And so it was a way of trying to discern the will of God. Not much different from what the disciples did after they had to replace Judas. It says they cast lots. What does that mean? They drew straws. So they figured God would see to it the guy who picked the long straw was the one he wanted. Just a way of trying to figure out what God wanted. So anyways, into the psalm. And the psalm starts out by saying, blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle, my loving kindness and my fortress, my high tower and my deliverer, my shield and the one in whom I take refuge, who subdues my people under me. Blessed be the Lord. And by the way, the word Lord there again is the word Yahweh. And so David is making reference to the covenant God, the God who promised Moses and the people of Israel at Mount Sinai that he would be their God and they would be his people, that he would protect them, he would care for them, and he would be with them always. But the opening part, I think, talks about something rather interesting. It talks about how in order to be a child of God, or what we today would simply call to be a Christian, takes training. You know, when I was in high school and college, and I always considered myself somewhat of an athlete, played football in high school, played football in college. The one thing I learned is that you can't just show up for the game and then go out and play. That you have to be practicing and training and getting ready for the game. And that takes practice every day, getting ready for the game, looking at game film, trying to figure out who your opponent is, what he's going to do, and then just physically getting yourself ready in the weight room, doing running. And that's not just something you do. And even when the seasons are over, I learned that you have to stay in training. Otherwise, you're going to be at a great disadvantage when you start again up for the regular season. And so I remember especially when I was in high school, our high school football coach felt that we needed to be in training all year round. And so we didn't have like weight coaches like we did ultimately in college who would work with us. But what he would do is he'd make all the football players go work out with the practice with the wrestling team. And that was a way of having us practice and train 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Every day you have to be training. And what David is saying here is that that's the same thing for a Christian. A Christian needs to be in training every single day to be a child of God. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to give you five or six things that I think are important. When I was at Zion, I used to pass out cards, especially to new members, like little business cards. And on them, on one side was always the name and the address, the phone numbers, email addresses, all that kind of stuff for people. But on the back side, I always listed these 6 things, the 6 traits, I call them, of being a Christian. But I think there are ways in which you would train yourself every day to stay active and to stay involved and stay being a Christian. Well, what are those 6 things? Well, they start out pretty simple. I think every Christian needs to do one, worship. I think worship is just where it all begins. It's one of the most important things we do. It's when we gather together with other people and worship God, and we gain strength from one another as we worship Him. It's where we set our priorities, where we show that God is number one in our lives and that our life is all about Him and about worship and praising God. Now, whenever I say that, I always realize that there are certain people in certain circumstances where they can't be at a church on a Sunday morning, maybe because of health reasons, because of jobs, but that's what the internet is for. One of the nice things that churches like Salem do is we broadcast our worship service. So even though you can't be with us, maybe, you can still worship with us on a Sunday morning. But although I still think ideally, the best way to do that worship is to be there with your brothers and sisters and to worship God in the church, gain strength from one another. But it's not the only way. I remember when I was at a church called Holy Cross in Waterloo, Illinois, which is a small little farming town sort of southeast of St. Louis, just across the Mississippi River from St. Louis. And we had this one kid. I lived probably about a quarter mile away from the church. And on Sunday mornings, we had this huge microphone or speaker up in our bell tower, which would always, do bell chimes. But on Sunday morning, we would turn it on so the whole worship service was broadcast through those speakers. So if you were driving by on a Sunday morning, you could hear our worship service blasting out through the bell tower. Well, we had this one kid he had been in Vietnam. He was a Vietnam vet and been really traumatized by the war. And he lived, like I said, about a quarter mile from the church. And I learned that I could never get him to come to church. I would call on him. I'd talk to him. We had a great relationship. He was a good friend. I just could never get him because he had a problem with groups of people. But then I found out right before I left there that on Sunday morning, what he would do is he would go out and sit on his back porch and listen to the worship service that was broadcasting over the bell tower. That's fine too. So number one, worship. This is how we keep ourselves trained for the battle of life. Worship. Number two, Bible study. I think it's important that we study the Bible. The Bible is where we find out what God wants us to do. This is where God speaks to us. And so whether you're doing a formal Bible study online or at your church, or whether you're reading through the Bible every day, I know Tim here at Salem has started a Read Through the Bible series, where I think it's on Friday. You can call in or come to the church, and he's reading through the Bible in a year. But it's important that we read the Bible, that we study the Bible. That's where God talks to us. That's where we hear the voice of God. Number three, an active prayer life. I think prayer is so important in one's life. As one is training to be a child of God, it's important to speak to God. And so I've always said to people, you need to set aside some time in order to communicate with God, to share your thoughts with God. Now, that doesn't have to be something so formal. It doesn't have to be, well, we have to go to the church to have prayer time, or I have to set up a dedicated place in my house, maybe build a little chapel in my house so I have an altar and a cross and candles and I'm praying. No. Prayer can be I always said prayer is very informal. I'll give you a couple examples. Number one, what was my prayer time when I was active in the church? Well, when I would come home late from meetings, to unwind, I would always go outside and take a walk around for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes. That was my prayer time. That was a time when I would talk with God. Give you an example of a not so formal prayer. I remember, and I've told this story many times, But I remember one time when I was in Belleville, Illinois, at St. Paul Lutheran Church as his pastor, and got a call in the middle of the night on a Saturday that a couple of our kids from our church, they were on their prom night and they got involved in a very serious car accident. And they were both at the hospital. And I had no other information. So I didn't know if they were alive. I didn't know if they were dead. I didn't know how badly they were injured. You can hear my Elmo talking. Elmo, quiet down. Elmo. See how he listens to me. Anyways, but I got in my car and I drove over to the hospital, Memorial Hospital in Belleville, Illinois. And I got out of my car, and it was one of those typical St. Louis nights. St. Louis had so many, it didn't get many clouds. It's not like living along Lake Erie like we do. But I got out of my car, and you could see every star in the sky. It's like diamonds sparkling in the sky. And as I was walking to the hospital, not knowing what I was going to find, I looked up at the stars, and I simply said, "You and me, God." And I walked into the hospital. That was my prayer that day. I was asking in my own informal way for God to be with me and help me find the words to say or the things to do. Now, fortunately, if you want, everybody always asks when I tell that story, well, how did it end? They survived. They were fine. They were badly injured. They spent a couple days in the hospital, but they were fine. They came home. So God answered my prayer. But anyways, that's the third thing. So worship, Bible study, active prayer life. And if I would suggest, if your church has prayer groups, we used to have groups at our church that would get together and pray, or we had prayer chains where they would pass down the names of people to pray for to a group of people who would spend their time praying for them. Get involved in that, or do it your own thing. All right, that's number 3. Number 4, commit to a ministry. Find something at the church that you belong to that you really enjoy. I would always tell people, just don't do something because they need a body in a spot. Well, they need somebody on the board, on the committee for Christian education, so I guess I should do that. No, if that's not your thing, don't do it. Do something that you enjoy. Find a ministry that is something that you enjoy doing. Find out what your talents are. What is it about you that you enjoy doing? I always told a story about the lady who came to me one time, and she said she wanted to do something, but she just didn't feel she had any talents. And I said, well, go home and think about what your talents are and how you could put those to work for the church. She came back and she said, well, I love to knit. And I read about this thing called a prayer shawl ministry where people gather together and make prayer shawls, and then they give them out to people who are sick or who are emotionally disturbed or going through bad times. And I said, well, it sounds great. Do it. So she went out and she organized women, got women to make shawls. We would bless them on a Sunday morning, and then they would be given out to people who are going through bad times. Find a ministry that takes your talent and your gifts and your skills and uses them. But be involved in a ministry that takes you out beyond yourself. That's how you train yourself. All right, that's number 4. Number 5, get involved in your community. Don't just sit back on the sidelines. Let your faith be seen by those people who are not Christians or who aren't part of a church. Become a Girl Scout leader, be a soccer coach, help in T-ball, work at the library, help in people-to-people ministry. If you find a food kitchen, go out and offer your time to help prepare meals or to take food out to people. Whatever you enjoy doing, find something over and beyond your church and get involved in your community. And the primary purpose for that is to show people, what does it mean to be a Christian? To be a Christian means to care about people. To be a Christian means to be involved in other people's lives. To be a Christian means to get involved. And I think that's number 5, how you train yourself. And then we come to the last one. And this is always the hardest one. And that's number 6, be a tither. That means, for those who don't know the expression tithing, what that means is give 10% of your income to the church. And every time I say that, people always look at me like, that's a lot of money, Pastor. And I always tell this story. I said, well, let's suppose for just a second that I'm going to give you $1 million. It's yours, tax-free, $1 million for you, no strings. Oh, there is one string. You have to give me back $100,000, 10% of that. Now, how many of you would sit back and say, "Oh, well, no, I don't want that $1 million. You keep it if you got that kind. If you want 100,000, of course, you jump at that opportunity. You would take the $1 million, give me 100,000 back because you say, "Hey, I still got $900,000." So I always tell people when you talk about tithing, if you understand that everything that we are and everything that we have is a gift from God, then God is simply asking us to return a portion of that which He has given us back to Him to use in His kingdom search. And besides, to me, it helps us organize our life and set our priorities. You know, I've always told people, if you really want to know what's important in your life, check 2 books in your purse or wallet or at home. Check your calendar. See where you're spending your time. How much of your time are you spending in things like worship, Bible study, prayer life, involved in your community, serving at your church? How much of your time are you giving to God? And number 2, look at your checkbook. How much of your monies, your resources are you giving to God? Or is your time and your gifts all about you? Is everything about what I want to do, serving my needs? Well, if you want to train yourself, like David is talking about in this psalm, we need to bring that under control too. The time we spend, where we spend it, how we worship, how we serve God, and how we serve one another, and how we spend our monies. Those 2 things will tell everything you want to know about what it means to be a child of God. Anyways, I'm going to get off of my pulpit and stop talking about the 6 things that I would suggest everyone try in order to train yourself and prepare yourself to serve God. And with that, I'm going to turn back to Tim and say, Tim, what's going on at Salem this week?
Hello, Pastor. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. What's happening at Salem this week? We've got worship out here at the pavilion at 10 a.m. Please join us if you're able. We'd love for you to have it. Come along with us. We are kind of in a reduced power mode today. We are not transmitting over our normal internet access. We are doing it over the Verizon network. So if there are any glitches, you're going to see those. And it's basically because we're doing not a full gigabit upload, download type of connection. So bear with us on that. But we do have live stream available on Facebook. We'll have that live stream replayed at 5 o'clock on YouTube. And this afternoon at 2 o'clock, we have Brookdale. It's Brookdale today. At 2:30, we have Brookdale worship at the Senior Living Center there in Worcester. So if you're there, we're going to be looking forward to seeing you and having a communion service for you. Now at 11 o'clock, right after our service, we have fellowship as usual. Please join us and enjoy the good treats and the good fellowship. Yesterday we had a rummage and bake sale, and we still have some stuff left over. So if you're interested, it's still in our basement level fellowship hall. Join us today and check out some of the goods. We'll be glad to accept your payment for the items, and we may be having another one in August. Haven't been certain about that yet, but we're probably going to leave it up in the fellowship hall for August when we open our doors again for another rummage sale. So join us for that. Next week on Monday, NFL Monday night, we have Nourishment, Fellowship, and Learning, starting at 6 o'clock with a meal, 7 o'clock, The Chosen series. Out here in the pavilion, we'll be watching another episode of The Chosen and then discussing it in detail. We'll break when we get done talking. So join us for that. And finally, as Pastor had mentioned during his Bible study, we do have a Bible cover-to-cover support group that meets on Fridays at 7 p.m. The link for that and all these other Zoom connections are available on slcw.org. Just click the link to join the group at that time of the evening on Friday, and you will get to be hearing the word, praying for God's guidance, sharing God's grace, and serving God's children, all in a 1-hour session of reading the Bible cover to cover. It includes a quiz section where we answer 10 questions about the Bible and it gets us to dive deeper into the Word. So join us each week for those activities. And again, once again, on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m., of course, we have Bible study with Pastor Nathan, currently going over the books of Psalms. So join us once again for those activities. We'd love to have you. Back to you, Pastor.
All right. Well, thank you, Tim. Thank you. Thank you. Anyways, I want to say to all of you, may you have a wonderful week. Hope you still have time. Got a half an hour. Jump in your cars. Come out and meet me and meet Tim at Salem Lutheran Church. We're behind the church in the pavilion for our outdoor worship. So there's still time to get in your car and join us and see how handsome the two of us are. So, anyways, I hope you'll come out and join us for worship. If not, I hope you have a great week. And I hope you join us again for our Bible study. Until then, may God's blessings shower itself down upon you. May He keep you as always in His love. But most of all, may He keep you smiling until we meet again. God bless you all.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Pastor.
Pastor.